Morning, everybody, and welcome to the webinar on Automatic for the People, using intelligent automation to ease contact with service users. I'm Siobhan Bonita. I'm a former UK senior civil servant, and I'm really delighted to be chairing this event on behalf of Blue Prism and Global Government Forum. Now, during the pandemic, people's needs for government support really skyrocketed, but social distancing rules and closed offices meant that civil servants had to move many of their services online. And to meet that huge level of demand, government departments and agencies, more than ever before, turned to a range of digital technologies, including Robotic Process Automation, RPA, to manage repetitive and administrative tasks. Intelligent automation can bring benefits for citizens and public servants, dramatically shortening case handling times, improving the user experience, and reducing errors, while releasing staff to handle the most complex cases and those things that absolutely need the personal interactions. Today, we'll hear from a real expert panel about some of the ways in which RPA has been used to streamline interactions with the public, both before and since COVID arrived, and what the challenges and opportunities are for public servants when thinking about adopting these new technologies. Now, in a moment, I'm going to introduce our fantastic panel and they'll all say a few words, but actually we also want to allow time after they've spoken to take as many of your questions from the audience as we possibly can. So you should see on your screens or whichever device you're using that there's a Q&A function at the bottom of your screens. Please at any time use that Q&A function to message in your questions, and we'll get through as many of those as we can after we've heard from the panel. So now to introduce our really stellar panel today. First, we'll hear from Philip Sheen, who is Head of Public Sector UK and Ireland at Blue Prism. With over 15 years experience of engaging with the UK public sector, Philip is focused on driving savings from across the public sector, enabling organisations to deliver the best possible outcomes and putting people right at the heart of the intelligent automation agenda. Then we'll hear from Dimple Davdra, who is Change Control Officer at the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, MHRA. Her work focuses on improving the health of millions of people through the effective regulation of medicines and medical devices, underpinned by good science and research. And she's been leading the automation of processes in the MHRA's Information Processing Unit. We also have with us here today Aidan Hardy, who is the Transition Team Delivery Manager at MHRA, where he's worked in various roles since 1995. And in 2016, when MHRA started to investigate the possibility of an RPA solution to processing medicine license applications, Aidan was really key in starting those conversations with Blue Prism. So Aidan's going to be on hand to take some of your questions as well later in the webinar. And last but not least, we'll hear from James Mitchell, who is the Global SVP for People at Blue Prism, where he's responsible for all things people and workplaces around the globe. With over 25 years experience helping public and private sector companies around the world, he's passionate about the role of automation in recreating the future of work. So as I say, we've got a brilliant panel here with loads and loads of real-time experience. So please do message in your questions. But without further ado, I'm now going to invite Phil to set the scene with his opening remarks. Over to you, Phil.
Siobhan, thank you very much indeed. And thank you to the Global Government Forum team for facilitating, setting up and supporting today. Firstly, though, I'd like to thank you all for joining the session. We're very aware it's precious time out of what I think most of us, and particularly in the civil service in the UK public sector, have very heavy workloads. So thank you for joining. Hopefully you'll gain some value from the next sort of 45, 60 minutes. And I'd also like to firstly thank Dimple and Aidan for offering to be here today and sharing their experience of what nearly the last 5 years that we've been working with the MHRA now. So thank you both for being here as well. So let's just keep it really simple and start at the start. RPA, intelligent automation, virtual workers, digital workers, hyper automation, a load of great buzzwords which are banded around a lot. People probably either see them on social media, see them in the press. There's probably a huge piece of misconception around what it actually is, what it does, what it doesn't do. And Dimple, I know, will come on to some of that later on. But effectively, what is RPA? What is intelligent automation? What are digital workers and why are they even relevant to the UK civil service? So at a very high level, I'll just be very, very simple for a moment. So automation, generally, RPA or intelligent automation being the next step on from that, is a piece of software. Effectively, it creates what we call a digital worker, which it mimics and replicates the behavior of us as human workers and how we interact with systems and applications. So at its most simple term, we'll all turn up to a laptop or a desktop, probably at home these days or in the office, and we'll start it up and we'll be asked to log on with a username and a password, and we'll go into some applications, maybe Outlook, maybe load up a web browser, maybe Northgate, SAP, Oracle, whatever it might be for our job. And we will interact with that system and we'll cut bits of data around. We might open an email with a PDF attachment and we'll take some data off that and input it into another application. All of those things that I've just mentioned there are able to be replicated and expanded upon by digital workers. And the whole premise here is trying to, or the software allows us to remove the highly repetitive, mundane, what a lot of organizations and people call the low value or zero value work that us as humans carry out. And I'll come on to this in a moment, but the big three things that we should be focusing on here are the value that humans offer to any part of an organization. There are three really important things. Emotional intelligence. So we have the ability to deploy emotional intelligence. You could sit opposite somebody or see from this webinar whether somebody's anxious, nervy, angry, upset, happy, all of those kind of good things. And particularly in the light of the services that the public sector deploy, NHS care workers, clinicians, police officers, those in the UK civil service, you know, it's actually being able to understand what the citizen or what the customer is after and actually being able to empathize with that person. So that as a very rounded view is what automation can do. The other two things that are really important are the ability for us to, as humans, think creatively and most importantly, subjectively. So what we as humans are really good at doing is looking at different data sets, being able to look at things in the round and then make subjective decisions. So if we look at the case of a police officer, for example, they're able to look at an adult social care report, maybe a mental health care report. They're able to look at a prescription, they're able to look at an offending record, and they can make an informed decision subjectively about potentially a course of action to take. And that's the value that we want. And across the civil service, we're trying to work with clients to help them realize the value of their humans. So that's automation. If we look at the public sector, there's a real oxymoron in the public sector. It's the one market in society that actually wants fewer customers. So actually the whole burden at the moment, if we look through the lens of the civic, there's civic, societal, economic, operational pressures on the civil service, which are colossal. There's things which those on this call will be more familiar with than I am, but 14 years of austerity, EUX, the pandemic, and these on their own are challenges, but they all mount up piece by piece to put additional strain on organisations. Whilst I think we are all incredibly cognizant and thankful that the NHS has been as tremendous as it has been in the last 2 years, I do wonder if society and people generally are blissfully unaware of the stress and the pressures that have been placed on departments and agencies across the wider civil service. The need to deliver services in a completely different manner. Overnight, huge shift in channel requirements, departments pivoting swathes of their workforce to work from home, but still delivering critical civil services. So if we look at things like HMRC, DWP, DEFRA, Department for Transport, Department for Education, they've all had to continue delivering these services. You've all had to do this, but actually do it in a very different way overnight. And I don't think potentially the UK civil service has received the credit or the praise or the press coverage that other all parts of the civil service or the public sector have. So how should we be looking at automation generally? My personal feeling, and that of a lot of organisations, is that automation should be seen as an enhancement to your existing workforce, not a replacement. And I think Dimple and the MHRI team are going to come on to this. But there's a slide I'd like to bring up just very quickly, and this may look familiar to some of you, and in part largely because it aligns to a lot of central thinking that the Cabinet Office has been undertaking for the last 18 months. We've aligned some of our strategy to this for good reason. If we look at the core aspects of what workforce should be doing, there are three core areas here which are around legacy transformation, delivering enhanced outcomes to the UK, and then interoperability. And a lot of people here look at these through technical lenses, quite understandably, because transformation, interoperability obviously attain to technical bits. But actually, you can see from here, it's really, really bigger than that. It's around how departments interact with each other, how organizations within regions interact with each other, target operating model delivery, people and workforce. They're all intrinsically linked to each other. And the UK civil service, as I think everyone will probably acknowledge, carries a huge amount of technical debt, carries a huge amount of organisational debt. And actually, we need to try and help support the UK civil service deploy services in the year 2021, 2022, but being cognizant of the challenges that are faced with the backdrop that's been built up over the last 20 or 30 years. And just in closing, I guess we kind of come back to what I was saying off. What we should be looking at doing is how intelligent automation, or automation generally, has a place to facilitate and enable these things at the core. So how we can help organizations place people at the heart of your automation agenda, allowing them to deploy those subjective, emotional intelligence and creative capabilities, and actually allow and enable the UK civil service to try and deliver the possible outcomes. So on that note, I'll hand back to Siobhan, but hopefully it's a starter for 10, and it might actually start some of the creative juices flowing after.
Thanks so much, Phil. Thanks, Phil. That's a brilliant opening presentation. I think lots of people in the audience will be very grateful, I think, for what you said about the work that the civil service has done throughout the pandemic. And I think you're absolutely right in that there were a lot of people who were kind of the unsung heroes, I think, in the civil service, having to keep those services going, having to transform the way that they worked and move huge amounts of things onto new platforms and do things in a different way. And really good to just hear you set out how automation can play a part in releasing some of that burden, releasing some of that pressure, but also allowing people to really use that advantage of where humans need to come in and do that kind of more creative, emotional work, which automation is not going to replace. And I think a lot of people also will like to hear what you said, and we can come back to that about being an enhancement rather than a replacement. Because I think one of the fears that people have about automation is it's going to replace a lot of the work that people do. What does that mean then for the workforce? So I'm going to ask now, I think Dimple might be having some problems. So let me just ask, I think she might have some problems with her connection at the moment. So either Aidan can do the presentation with Dimple, or maybe we change the order while we sort that out and we ask James to come in. So let me see, Aidan, are you okay to do that for Dimple, or would you like James to do his presentation next?
I think mine's cutting up a little bit as well. So
should we get James, and then maybe Dimple can log out, log back in and see if that's...
yes, I think that's probably
James,
a good idea.
Can I come all the way over to you with your lovely backdrop?
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Siobhan. Thank you, Phil. So changing the order, I'm not Dimple, I'm James. And I'm the Global SVP for People at Blue Prism. I build on what Phil has shared, and then a little bit more around the kind of cultural impacts and what you need. Because I think the challenge and the way that I've positioned this is kind of intelligent automation. Is it leaning into something brand new, or leading into something that actually is not unknown? A challenge with automation, or rather the word automation, is that for those unfamiliar with it, the realities of this evolved way of working, it conjures up some images that probably have been formed over time around talk tracks based on pictures of physical welding robots, of car plants, or if you're lucky enough to have a Roomba and you watch it go round clearing up things that it shouldn't, or robotic dogs from Boston Dynamics. We have this physical piece, and when you come to talk about digital workers, and as Phil described it, it's kind of a piece of software. It's like, how do I get my head around this? Or I make that massive leap to Hollywood and go, oh, you mean Skynet and the Terminator, where people are then, secondary to the robots taking over the universe. For those of you more adept in the world of automation, the challenge can be influencing others who rely on the knowledge of existing process history, kind of the as is versus the what could be. And this level of creativity that's actually required to think differently about the way that you actually do work isn't often in any organization, institution, government, public sector, private sector, something that people recognize or reward. And all of us who regularly or otherwise interact with any e-commerce platform or online banking platform are actually interfacing with automation every single time we do it. There aren't people there doing the things so quickly that you're just impressed by it. Be that chatbots redirecting or answering tier 1, tier 2 questions, or that thank you for the order personally, or we wish you a good day or good evening, or even the following day when you've been searching for something on Google and you suddenly go into your social media and it says, by the way, you've still got something in your basket that you can't afford from yesterday. Do you still want it? And here's that next great offer. That's automation of a human pattern of communication. What we're talking about when we come to talk about automation is that there are humans in the loop with all of this. It is not about the degradation of the role of the worker back into the Industrial Revolution. And there are two primary reasons why humans are still included. Firstly, is people's ability to exercise skills such as judgment and creativity. The latter, creativity, is not yet in a place where artificial intelligence can take over and suddenly there's decisions made on an autonomous basis completely. Even if the true soothsayers are right, the second motivation for humans having roles in complex systems is the level of responsibility for the operation and performance. That isn't left to others to manage, that is a human piece. So why intelligently automate? What if you were able to run daily processes that had up to 100% resiliency? What if you were able to connect one system to another system, not through an API or any other protocol, but by authoring a process that meant only the data you really need is shared? What if you're in a function or department or organization or institution that has so many systems in order to operate effectively, you have to have at least 10 windows open at any single moment in time to move data between them. And not only that, there is a real challenge at the fact that you might be interrupted by your new co-workers, either a child, a pet, or a relative. What if you need to run those processes 24/7, 365? What if you could rewrite the rule book on how things actually run versus how others perceive it to be run? And I think one of the biggest challenges with automation is you're applying it in a lot of cases to already existing processes versus having the luxury, which I have right now, to completely reinvent based on what the outcome that I want rather than trying to enhance the process. And what if you could begin with the outcome required versus the process to get there? The way we work doesn't change or evolve or progress if there's not that level of curiosity or inquisitiveness encouraged within our organizations or functional cultures and workforces. And actually, it's not about risk. It's actually about the acceptance that what you do right now might not be the best way. It's very simple. The very well-worn story of the box in the right-hand corner of the piece of paper on a production line owned by Ford Motor Company. And the old adage goes that that box was either marked with a 0 or a cross for many, many, many years, all the way through to about the 1990s. And in fact, that box in the upper right-hand corner, when you went back through the archives, dated back to 1945, and it was the number of air raids during a day that introduced workflow. But that was still being used in 1996 because it just was. It was just the way we got things done. I lead a function that's responsible for, and it seems during the pandemic, even accountable for the way that people behave and act. The same functional area in business that for every year that I'm here, more needs to be saved, cut, rationalized, yet the workload and expectations rise in the opposite direction. I cannot keep repeating what I do day in and day out, expecting a change. That, according to one very famous German-born theoretical physicist, will not change the resultant outcome. And it doesn't have to start with transformation at scale. We don't have to think differently due to a global pandemic. We don't even need an event to think differently about ways of working. We should actually, from a cultural perspective, encourage, reward, and have this level of learning agility as a core skill and practice. There are three waves of automation to break it down. The first one is around efficiency and productivity. The second around that business organizational performance improvement. What do we need to do to get things to run better? And then the third wave is the wave that's really exciting, which is about business transformation. And that business transformation around how can we disrupt and change what we do for the better? What is the art of the possible? And I will tell you from my own experience, automation for my team started when I arrived in November 2019, and I walked into an automation company. I thought, hang on a minute, where's my automation? And so I'm being very candid and very transparent with you. I looked at it, I thought, how can this possibly be that we are talking about automation, the way things get done in a new world of work, and we're not doing it? And I've joined so many teams and functions and companies whereby they put in a technology to solve a problem or a gap. They don't think about the automation. Firstly, there are two problems. One's behavior. The other one is legacy system architecture. There are many more, but these tend to be the two main ones that I come across. An automation assistant can resolve both. The requirement, for example, to provide more data or analytics to drive better decision making isn't always solved by the latest West Coast of USA startup that has to go through a procurement process, and you know it never will. Actually, sometimes it's about going, what is the outcome we want, and mapping the process back to achieve that outcome. That's a big challenge for a lot of organizations, functions, and institutions, because you have all of those humans involved in it going, yes, but what if? What if this goes wrong? What if that goes wrong? What if it misses? But what's the outcome that you seek, not the inputs that you want? What my focus at the moment is the experience that I want staff to have when they engage as a candidate and their employee life cycle throughout the organization. How can I improve and facilitate, for example, one portion of this, which is the joining experience across multiple geographies, in multiple time zones, in multiple functions, with multiple start dates and multiple level roles. Don't get me started on the distance metrics that are associated with the pandemic either. At its most basic, in this kind of wave 3 transformation, I want folks to feel that when they join, they've got the right information, tools, email groups, knowledge repositories, buddies from day one. That's really, really, really challenging to do in a very manual process, because I would need to hire more people every time we opened up a geography. Or I automate all of the essentials, and then the human touch is that greeting on day one when they come in. I don't need, as I historically would have done maybe 5 or 6 years ago, that human piece. And a lot of this isn't just, you know, well, that's fine, James, you work in a fast growth, rapid expanding technology company. I've seen this painfully similar in established companies, organizations, institutions, not out of complacency, but it's just because that's the way it is. And then you find somebody who knows a workaround. It's not neuro or rocket science either. And I think that can be one of the misnomers around automation, that you have to have a degree of high level technical coding competence to be able to do automation. That's not how it actually works. My HR process and automation expert joined us, well, 3 years ago. She was in that infamous home of the Big Mac. Okay, so she worked in the Golden Arches. And in early 2020, she joined us with no prior experience of automation, developing automation, writing processes, or anything else. But she's my first HR process and automation expert because of the way she thinks. Yeah. She thinks about things not as everybody else thinks about them. She thinks about, what's the outcome I'm trying to get from here? What's the experience? I still see hesitation. I see it on a daily basis. I see hesitation around challenging the status quo and how much of the status quo that we can change. And by the way, every time I share an org chart, my org chart includes my 5 digital workers that currently work for me. They are as critical to the infrastructure and what we do as the people. Do any of my folks feel threatened by the introduction of automation? No. Do they feel they might lose their jobs over having these workers as part of the team? No. Do they feel like we get more done and we have less of an error rate and we get much better marks in audits? Yes. And that's just wave 1. There will be a world, in conclusion, whereby what we consider today to be customary working norms will not exist, nor will it be accepted by any human worker we wish to engage. Our collective challenge, I guess, is whether or not to adopt or adapt to the new or different, or deny that it's relevant. Or better yet, learn from somebody like Dimple, who's been through this process, and share those experiences across different sectors, different departments, different functional areas. I'm sure many of you still remember those early conversations about the impact of email on ways of working, along with its longevity and usefulness. Thank you.
Thanks, James. I'm not sure I would say the impact of email was an overwhelmingly positive experience, but really good to hear what you say there about the fact that we're using automation anyway. You know, we probably just don't know it, that it's part of our kind of day-to-day kind of actions all the time anyway. All the benefits that you set out there, you know, better data management, streamlining processes, better outcomes delivered, increasing your efficiency, all of those things, but coming right back, as you say at the end, to people and how can this benefit people? And it's really good to get your experience of how you've applied this to that, to employees, to the people, the HR environment as well, and then setting up really nicely to hear from Dimple as well about her experiences. So thank you very much, James, for that. Lots of food for thought. Please do send in your questions from the audience, but hopefully, Dimple, now you are able to hear us and we're able to hear you, and I'm going to come over to you for your presentation.
Hi everyone, hope everyone's keeping well. Apologies for the IT technical issues. I'm just going to give you a quick overview of our experience and journey so far in automation. Next slide, please, Maria. So the agenda, so what I'll be going through is brief role of what MHRA, the role of the information processing unit, and that's within MHRA. It's a division within MHRA, also known as IPU. The challenges IPU face prior to automation, the sources of information for robotic process automation, so the information we used for automation, benefits for IPU after automation, and lessons learned. Next slide, please, Maria. So the role of MHRA, the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, also known as MHRA, enhance and improve the health of millions of people every day through the effective regulation of medicines and medical devices underpinned by science and research. We are recognized globally as the authority in its field. The agency plays a leading role in protecting and improving patient health and supports innovation through scientific research and development. Next slide, please, Maria. So within the Technology Digital Data Delivery Division, also known as TD3, that's where the Information Process Unit sits. And they are responsible for ensuring that regulatory applications relating to marketing authorization and clinical trial authorization are entered and validated onto the agency's Sentinel database system. We are the main submission hub of the agency. So marketing authorization is the process of reviewing and assessing the evidence to support a medicinal product in relation to its marketing finalized by granting of a license to be sold. And clinical trial authorization must be applied for before a clinical trial for any medication can start. It is a fast-paced and target-driven environment, as the team plays a vital role in processing approximately 100,000 submissions a year, ensuring the agency meets its legislative and internal targets so that the patients are receiving their required medication on time. The decisions are supported by high-quality data, and we play a key role on making final decisions on some applications. Next slide, please, Maria. The challenges we faced in IPU was the time and resource it was taking to enter data into the Sentinel database system. There was a high volume of manual intensive data entry. Scientific classifiers were having to do on an everyday basis. So scientific classifiers are the experts in validating these submissions. We were working with outdated systems, so clinical trial system has now been improved, and the Sentinel database system has also been enhanced, but still involved a lot of manual data entry. We were reworking applications as we had a two-step process in IPU, and therefore there was a vast amount of duplicated effort amongst teams. So continuous improvement team is the team within IPU, which I am part of. We are continuously driving change to improve the current processes we have in place and maximize the efficiency of the current systems. We looked into how we could streamline and automate our current processes that we had in place so that scientific classifiers were not having to do repetitive manual data entry and focus their efforts more on the scientific decision-making tasks. Next slide, please, Maria. So the sources of information that we use for automation and are currently using are the ECTD structure, which is also known as the Electronic Common Technical Document, and it's a standard format for submitting. So it's a standard format that the applicants use to submit. This format has an XML style sheet, which is a standard file that is created for all submissions. We also request applicants to submit using the electronic application form, also known as EAF, which also comes with the XML. So all information entered by the applicant in the form can be generated into an XML by a click of a button on the form. The tags always stay the same for all EAF forms. The route of submission the applicants are asked to submit in is the submission portal route, and they all generate an XML once the applicant submits. We also request applicants to submit a cover letter with their submissions. Some of our submissions have a standard cover letter template, which they follow. These consistent documents that are generated within any submissions provided us enough consistency for some automation on data entry. Next slide, please, Maria. The agency's Information Processing Unit, also known as IPU, reached a major milestone in February 2019 as robotic processing for clinical trial applications went live, delivering faster processes and better quality submissions for customers. The virtual workers named Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, and Echo have begun automatically processing the initial stages of all clinical trial applications, and later was developed to include all variation submissions, initials, and renewals. So I'll just give you a brief overview of what initial, renewals, and variations is. So initial application is submitted to market the medication in the UK. Variation application is submitted when there is any change to your marketing authorization, and renewals is submitted when a license of the medicine is running out. So marketing authorization is normally granted for 5 years. The license must be renewed prior to the expiry date to continue to market the medicine in the UK. Being the main submission hub for the agency, IPU is constantly seeking better and faster ways of validating high quality submissions. So an excellent service is provided to pharmaceutical industries, and the time available for assessment teams is maximized. The 5 virtual workers are automating the initial manual tasks involved in processing large volumes of submissions. Whilst the decisions needed for the final validation and quality assurance are still made by experienced classifiers, the virtual workers can complete data entry roughly 3 times faster than a human. The virtual workers go through approximately 5,000 to 6,000 submissions a month. Not all are processed, some do fall out in the out of scope bucket, which have to be handled manually. All submissions must be picked up within the internal target set. Advantage of working with virtual workers is that they don't need to eat or sleep, don't take holidays, and don't have other work to get on with. So they process each submission within minutes of it being received, not able to work around the clock. We are therefore increasing the speed from receipt to validation, potentially giving assessment teams more time and delivering an improvement in response time for applicants. Our virtual workers have high standards and expect submissions to be presented within a normal range of formats. Poor quality submissions will confuse them and require manual processing. To improve the quality of submissions from our customers, we also introduced a nudge program to help applicants understand how to improve standards. So the benefits this has brought to IPU is faster and simpler to prepare daily work lists for IPU scientific classifiers, more granular detail of what our submission is, and information is now available immediately on receipt of IPU to manage workflow. Time saved to focus on more scientific decision-making tasks also saved us 2 full-time experts. Quality of data is improved as the virtual workers only process in one way, whereas with classifiers, multiple processing techniques could be used, increasing error rates. For example, having 2 applications open at the same time and reviewing and processing the wrong one. So what benefits has this brought beyond IPU? So to the agency. So quality of case creation is now more reliable because cases are being created by virtual workers, minimizing the risk of human error, instilling more confidence around the agency in the speed, timing, and accuracy of IPU work, reducing downstream checking and rework. Next slide, please, Maria. So what we have learned in the last few years, we have had the virtual workers. It's been a success, but as we have developed, we can see changes that can possibly be undertaken, which we are currently working with Blue Prism along with our platform upgrade. We do have high volume of PDF paper forms that applicants currently use in submitting certain submissions, and this has brought some difficulties in automating the process. Before preparing for any automation, it's important to see how much of the process can be simplified. Automation requires processes that are consistent, as they do not have the ability to think. Humans can adapt, but virtual workers will struggle. For example, the data or information must be coming from the same location each time. We have 82 colleagues in the team, which is a significant investment for the agency. We are therefore looking into ways of further automating more of our processes. We have had to create an in-house team who can maintain the virtual workers. The advantage of this is that any small glitches to the automation can be fixed internally, and any small changes to processes can also be completed. The disadvantage is it is quite easy to forget if you don't do this for a while. When colleagues do leave, it is time consuming training other colleagues up to the same level. We have done some further development since we initially introduced the virtual workers. The UK's decision to leave the EU prompted the European Medicine Agency to instruct marketing authorization holders, also known as MAH, to transfer the license from the UK to another member state in the EU. Once the MAH informs us of the new country, the internal administrative process is straightforward and can be done within 10 minutes. But when you have approximately 3,800 transfers to process before exit date, well, you can imagine the burden and the resource headache that could have brought. So who in the agency could possibly have the time and patience to complete a process 3,800 times whilst ensuring quality is maintained on top of the normal business as usual work? Enter the IPE robots. After 4 days of coding and testing with assistance from Blue Prism, we were able to complete a robotic process which replicates the human clicks and keystrokes of taking a submission from case creation all the way through to grant in Sentinel, which is the final stage, and a letter is also sent out to the applicant. The work saved the agency 633 working hours, which is 88 working days. So it had a significant impact. That's it. Next slide, Maria.
Thank you so much, Dimple.
You're very welcome.
I mean, it's really, really good to have that really tangible, real example, because you've given us a really clear understanding of what the benefits have been to your area of work. I mean, the benefits there that you spoke about, faster assessments, improving the quality of the applications, ultimately providing better services, a wider impact on the reputation of the agency itself, because you were able to improve the services there, and just showing how those different challenges could be met by slightly different solutions that you worked up with Blue Prism. So really, really good tangible kind of example there. Audience, please do message in your questions, but I'm going to kick off actually by coming back to all of you on the panel, because one of the things that did come up, I think, in all of your presentations there was the idea of automation enhancing what people do. It doesn't replace what people do. But I think, having been a civil servant myself and not being an expert in automation, I think one of the preconceptions that people have about automation is if you bring it into an organization, it is going to lead to job losses. People are going to lose their jobs because of this. So one, I would like your reflections on that. What do you say to organizations or to individuals who might be worried about that as a consequence of this? And also just your thoughts on what are the other kind of initial barriers that you come up against when you are talking to organizations who you think could benefit from automation. I don't know if we have Aidan back on the line with us at the moment. If we, I will come to him as well, because I know he was early on in that process with Blue Prism. Phil, I haven't heard from you for a bit. I'm going to come back to you first on this sense of what are the kind of overall misconceptions that you think, and in particular that thing about job losses through automation.
Normally, most people are quite happy when they haven't heard from me for a while, but thank you. So, no, it's, I think you touched on the thing we spoke about. So, what's the general perception? We look at every organization is different. And I think historically, and I've been, as you mentioned at the outset, I've been interfacing into the public sector in different guises now for just over 15 years. And I've seen the public sector change a lot, and that's from the outside in. So I'm sure those on the call that work intimately inside the civil service have seen it change even more. There's absolutely the mantra that it's here to augment people. I think there are some parts of the UK public sector that are actually being challenged in the same way the private sector is, which they are having to make headcount reductions. So let's be super honest about that. There are some organisations that don't have a choice. They're being forced by macroeconomic factors that they have to cut their cloth accordingly. But what I would say by and large, and I use one of our first customers as an example, so one of our first ever customers, actually the second customer after Dimple in all fairness, East Suffolk and North Essex NHS Foundation Trust, a hospital up in Colchester and Essex. They merged the two hospitals together about 3-4 years ago. They actually have net positive staff on their books because they've grown an automation team. So what we've seen there, for example, are two things. Number one, the time that's been freed up for medical secretaries and clinicians, doctors and nurses, those doctors and nurses, those medical secretaries haven't been let go. They've just been able to do more of the caring for people bit, which is what ultimately those people probably join the NHS to do. But actually they've employed more people because they've grown, to Dimple's point, they've grown a small team of people that run their automation centre of excellence. So the really ironic thing is they've actually employed more people. Now they've saved money, and every organisation will go through an organic churn. So if we look at the real pragmatic way that organisations work, people die in service, people retire, people are made redundant, people leave organically. And the question that we found a lot of chief execs asking is actually, if we look at this more intelligently and say, actually, well, when people leave the organisation organically, for whatever reason, do we need to replace that person with a human head, or can we offload all or part of that work to a virtual worker? So I'd say there are very different ways to look at it. There's not one size fits all, and different organisations in different parts of the public sector are different. And I say, therefore, it comes back to each organisation's specific, both operational and financial requirements.
Yeah. Dimple, I'm going to come to you again before I go to James, but did Phil say there, does that resonate with you? Or did you have people who were worried about this issue?
Yes, I think the biggest misconception is automation will take over my job. At the level that technology is now, and will be in the foreseeable future, I don't believe automation can take up over every aspect of most jobs. So for example, for MHRA, validation work is a decision-making work area and requires human input. So even when companies introduce automation, though human workers are still I think human workers are still often needed to do part of the work. Virtual workers may place the data into the system, but humans will need to provide that final decision before grant. So humans also oversee operations and check for quality issues as well. So, some aspects, at least at this point, I believe that are completely out of range for automation. So I know human is probably still going to be needed in terms of human. I mean, when we did automation, we saved those 2 FTEs, but we used them for customer approach. So customer service. So they were just moved to the customer service area rather than being taken off work for a job, I think. So it brings more work. It brings it gives you the opportunity to use these colleagues for other areas of work, for other expertise areas.
Redeploy them where those humans be of most value. James,
exactly.
About people, so this must be something that comes, that you're faced with on a regular basis. What's your response to that worry that some people might have?
I think it probably comes back to Phil's point around what are the overall macroeconomic drivers around why you're bringing in automation. It sounds a lot of it is phase 1 or wave 1 and wave 2, as I was describing earlier. But when it gets to the wave 3 of the true transformation, that's when you can start to redesign your organization or function. That's when you're probably looking at human digital technology in some sort of equation. And that's probably when you would go, okay, what do I need to do with the people that I have in those roles? The amount of skills that are transferable is one area I think organizations need to get better at understanding, versus saying what that person did, they no longer do, and therefore this is the route. It's like that person has such a level of inherent knowledge around how your organization operates. Where can you now redistribute them? That's a practice that I think will be a byproduct, or I'm starting to see it as a byproduct of those organizations that are adopting the 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 digital workers. It's not about the fact that they are actually taking 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 people out. What are those people now doing? They move up, and I'm going to call it the value chain. So they move up from that data input. I'm sitting there every single day paper form input into system, digital workers reading form, inputting that into system, mimicking the keystrokes that are done. That person now becomes the reviewer of 200 applications in a day, 200 license approvals in a day, not the I inputted 25 in a day. So I think there's a speed piece, there's an efficiency piece, there's an effectiveness piece. But I also think for my function within, I had to make a really hard call to say, I'm not going to make the progress on automation unless I actually take somebody and put them in that role to say, here is your focus. So it will also have the flip side of, well, you've got to get better because I've now reduced your team or added to your team somebody with a different set of strengths.
Yeah. Okay. So that is reassuring, I think, for people on that particular issue. We've got a question for Dimple, who I think might be having connection problems again, but I'm going to ask it. I'm sure she will come back in a moment. But the question I think is relevant for all of you on the panel anyway is, with the impressive successes that have obviously been achieved to date, what are the future plans for expanding automation across your organisation? So when we have Dimple back, I'm going to ask her that. But I want to ask James and Phil in the meantime.
I think Dimple might be on audio, I think.
Yeah,
Dimple,
I am
are you
on
there?
audio. Yeah, I'm
Fantastic.
on audio. I've just closed down my video. I think it's playing up.
Yeah.
So for the future, we go through approximately 10,000 submissions a year, and many of these work types have not yet been automated due to the various different reasons. For example, having the PDF paper version forms, which don't have the XML backbone, and therefore the automation could not recognize this data when we did it initially. But I believe there's this new OCR feature available now, so we can possibly look into automating some of those areas of work. Also, due to UK leaving the EU, new processes have been introduced where we feel automation could assist with processing, which will give us the opportunity to simplify some of our processes for scientific classifiers. So yeah, we have got a lot of areas where we can still work on for automation.
Yeah. I mean, that just made me think of one thing that struck me in your presentations is in the introduction, I mentioned COVID, and I know, Phil, this has been a big thing for Blue Prism in working with the public sector during COVID and helping them with that huge demand during COVID. Dimple, you were talking there about the need to do things because of the Brexit enforced deadline that you had.
Yeah.
In terms of automation in the future, James, you mentioned the fact that this shouldn't just be about organisations responding to those big shocks. This should be something that organisations are thinking about as part of their continuous improvement and continuous development. So I'm interested from all of you about what types of areas do you think, I know that's quite a general question, but what types of areas do you think the civil service in general could benefit from automation where maybe they're not yet, they're not overcome that hesitancy yet to jump into this? Phil, any thoughts from you on the types of areas where maybe this could be hugely beneficial?
Yes, I mean, and I touched on it. The UK civil service has two big challenges, which are legacy and quite systemic across it. So number one is the way that departments and agencies are predicated on working in silos, and they rely on people fundamentally being the glue between process and different departments. Yet the citizen, if we even go back to like early 2006, 2008, and the Varney review was talking about service islands and how the citizen actually doesn't really care about that. The citizen wants one point of contact. I want to update my record once, and the utopia is there's a single view of the citizen. We're miles away from that. Let's be super pragmatic. We understand the challenges operationally and financially why. But I think if we look at different data sets residing in different departments for different reasons, is actually there's an ability or a desire to try and join those up to the best of our ability, but we can't because it's relying on, and Dimple used the great example, it's relying on huge swathes of people to migrate data from one application to another. And largely, I'll make a black sort of tar brush comment here, the systems application providers don't want to make it easy for you to carry out data migrations between applications because they make money from you sticking with their data application. Dare I sort of be scandalous enough to say that, but the reality is actually the place that automation can provide is things like that. So allowing organizations to try and be adaptive and we've spoken about this before amongst some of our peers, is actually, to your point, not using a pandemic or EUX or a societal problem or a challenge which has been colossal as the catalyst. Organisations should be looking at this because it's the right thing to do, and actually removing the inhibitor is using things like automation as an enabler to deliver better services. And Dimple touched on it as well, you know, allowing people within the organisation to actually talk to other human beings. So when you phone up to HMRC or DWP and you've got a real problem because a la today, your universal credit extra top up is being cancelled, or you're off the furlough scheme. I mean, how many people are going to be affected today because of those two very big macroeconomic factors? And they really want to talk to a human, and actually you want to free people up to be able to take those phone calls. So things like that. Yeah, thanks. James, so in terms of kind of where you think automation, you know, be most beneficial in the future, interested in your thoughts on that. But also you did mention, you know, there's still hesitancy, and Phil there has mentioned the structural issues that maybe are barriers to this, working in silos, departments not necessarily talking to each other, so not joining up the systems. From your experience of working with so many different organizations, is that getting better? Like how do we overcome some of these barriers so that people can actually adopt some of these new ways of working?
Oh, well, this is such a philosophical question for me around why do we still have competition between functions and departments and different parts of the same institutions? Why is that something that's engendered in terms of the objectives to be better than X department, to be better than Y department, versus actually what's the outcome we want? And if I take that internally a minute, and I don't want my hiring team to be better than my operations team, to be better than my reward team, to be better than my people partnering team. Otherwise, I'm going to have a really mixed experience for any employee coming into the organization. But I see so much of that as a citizen caring for somebody who has Parkinson's and Lewy body dementia, and I am dealing with 19 different agencies who do not talk to each other. I've created my own automation process on a desktop for my family to be able to manage the interactions between those. So if I get a call from, I don't know, the overnight care service that comes in twice a week to sit with my father, that automatically notifies social services now, but I do that. So I think it's if I think about it from a public sector citizen perspective, for me, it's around what are we trying to do? What is that outcome we are trying to drive at? And how, therefore, do we move away from it's about efficiency and effectiveness in my department because of my budget or my constraints or what I need to do? And actually, not all good or change in society is going to cost more money. It's actually going to be about efficiency and effectiveness of process. Internally for us, we have the same issues inside the organization: procurement processes, financial systems processes, how long it takes to get things actually approved. Actually, so much of that can be automated. It doesn't, it's what does need the human interaction, what doesn't need the human interaction. Start there.
And a real reminder that it is about ultimately improving services to the public and improving services to...
I'd hope so.
We've got another question coming in from the audience, so please do keep that coming. But before we go to that, I want to come back to Dimple, because picking up on this, how do we kind of, you know, where might automation go in the future? Dimple, picking up on everything that Phil and James have said there, you're in a really good position now in that you've got all this experience. You had a slide there on your lessons learned. What, you know, to what extent do you think the civil service is good at sharing that good practice now? Like, to what extent do you think you can play a role in helping other civil servants to understand the benefits of automation in the way that you've used it? And also, looking back, what would you have done differently? What would you and Aidan, do you think, have done differently throughout this project?
Well, in terms of how many civil servants have already got automation, I think if we were not the first, we were one of the top few to have automation. And in terms of communication with other civil servants, we've not really had any communication in terms of civil servants with automation. But yeah, that would be a good start, you know, us explaining and sharing our experience with automation to help assist the other civil servants. How part of our automation development included a bespoke dashboard that was created to allow us push submissions back in. So, I don't think that bespoke dashboard was great in the beginning, but then when we weighed out the time it was taking to complete these exceptions. So this dashboard, basically, anything that goes into exceptions, we used to manually add in the data and push it back into the virtual workers to help us process that submission. So it goes back into the virtual workers, but it wasn't working great because the time it was taking us to do that actual manual work, picking up that submission manually would have been, it's just easier, and it was taking less time. So we're in conversations with Blue Prism at the moment to get rid of this dashboard. It was a bespoke dashboard, and the other disadvantage was because it was bespoke, when we did have issues with the dashboard, it took far longer for the resolution time in comparison to if we did have a normal issue with the virtual workers. So I think that was the challenge and issues we've mainly had, is this bespoke dashboard. So yeah, if you do automation, please don't make any bespoke dashboards, because I had a lot of issues with storage capacity as well with the dashboard. It's just because obviously it was bespoke, so Blue Prism, the expertise around this area was quite minimal as well. So when we did go back to them saying we've got this issue, it did take time to get resolved. Whereas in comparison to if it was just a normal virtual worker issue or a Blue Prism issue, it was just, you would get a day, within the day it was fixed, and we still had within a day it's normally fixed. I think that was the most challenging, having this dashboard.
Yeah, and I guess
I think
sorry.
I think one of the big kind of learning lessons was we should have really looked at our processes a little bit better, and what a human does, what a human can kind of see and process is very different to how the robot looks at that piece of data. So I think we should really have looked at the data source, seen if there was a better way of getting that data source in before we started developing the process. And we have multiple submission methods, and we really should have just kind of started off with the few, rather than try and have a solution for all of these, because we've got multiple branches. If it's this, do this. If it's this, do this. If it's this, do this. Rather than just kind of really focus on the data set and try to make sure that's as high quality as possible.
So Aidan, at the beginning, were your issues, your biggest challenges, or the lessons that you've learned, I think looking back, were they things like that, things around understanding your processes and the data issues, or were they more cultural issues in terms of resistance from people in the organisation to work with Blue Prism and to bring in automation in the first place? What were your biggest considerations starting the project?
The sell was quite difficult because it was, this is going to be affecting my job. But I think once we started showing people what it was going to do, they realized, actually, we're getting rid of the boring bit, the repetitive bit, the bit where I'm kind of switching off my brain. And I'm now going to become much more kind of focused on the actual data and doing the interesting bit, the bit where I have to think, make decisions, and really, I think the targets have gone up that little bit more because we've reduced the kind of startup bit. But I think people are more engaged now with the data that's coming in.
Yeah, and all that learning, I guess, now is valuable going forward for new initiatives that you undertake.
Yeah, and I think one of the things we were working with Blue Prism, and this was a very kind of new thing for them as well. The data sets that they were kind of dealing with before were different. So I think we asked an awful lot, and they delivered most of that. But I think it would have benefited us if we'd had someone who'd been through something similar before, to kind of help guide us on what we should be asking for.
We're learning together. We've had another question in from Susan Fleming, who has asked, could we automate data reliability? and quality checks. And she's put, for example, coding irregularities, unexpected or unusual values. Is that something that automation can do? Bill or James, I guess this is one for you to answer.
So the easy answer is yes. Slightly more complex answer is the devil's always in the detail. But the really good mantra that we go by is think about how you would task a human to do the process. So I probably use this as an example. You say, right, I want you to look through all of these data sets. There might be, for example, an Excel spreadsheet, or it might be an application with a whole load of different data cells. And you'd say, if it's within these parameters, it's good. If it's outside of these parameters, then it's not good. The same applies. You would teach a digital worker to replicate. We use this expression, mimicking human behavior. And I welcome Dimple to keep me honest. Obviously, she's actually deployed it in the real world. But the very simple thing is, how would you teach a human to do it? You train a human that there are certain data sets, certain parameters. If it's within, it's good. If it's without, it's bad. And you just build the digital worker to replicate that.
Yeah.
So yes.
So Dimple, is that something that was part of the work? I mean, it sounds like it's a part of what you did.
Yes, that's correct. So in the beginning, we designed our requirements for our parent. It was pretty much big, like our expectations were quite high for what we wanted, and then we realized that our processes are quite complex. So we had, with the time frame we had, we had to kind of like review the whole situation and what we can actually achieve in the time frame that we had. You know, like Aidan said, you know, because of all these different submissions that come in, every submission is different. So, you know, we had to make so many different ones, all these submissions that are coming in. If this comes in, you go through this branch. If it comes to this branch, yeah. So my advice to anyone would be start small, because we try to start big and try and get everything done, but it's not. It's better to start small and expand on it than go the other way around.
Yeah. Some really good lessons from you there, and some tips from you and Aidan, looking back on what you might do differently. I guess my question is to Blue Prism. You know, some of this stuff was obviously new to you as well a few years ago, and working with different public sector organisations. What have you learned along the way in terms of kind of maybe common mistakes that departments make when they come to you, or other organisations make when they come to you? And also to all of you, where do you see the future? Like, what do you think automation is going to look like in the public sector in, say, 5-10 years' time? James, I'll start with you.
Trying to find a mute button. So I think in terms of commonalities of challenges faced by organisations, mine will probably be more outside of the public sector than inside the public sector. And I think going back to Dimple's statement is, how much do you want to bite off first time round? Like literally, it's, we want to automate this, and then you suddenly go into the processes and you realise that they've written a process that actually doesn't account for any variables whatsoever. It doesn't account for all of the nuances that happen in day-to-day transactions and day-to-day interactions. So I think that the mantra of, even with transformation pieces, you've either got to find somebody that's done a similar transformation, or you've got to trust that we know what we're doing. Because I think, going back to the dashboard example, I've seen that with other customers as well, is what we now need is this, Blue Prism, and you don't have it. And it's like, you really, really, really don't. No, what we need is this, and you don't have it. And then it's invented. And then a year later, it's like, what we don't need is the dashboard that you helped us invent. No, okay, fine. So I think it's that, you know, I was part of the kind of, in my previous organization, part of that cloud revolution of kind of like, what is cloud, from people looking out of the window and going, is that what you mean, to kind of like, no, you can describe it as a tower block, and it's, you know, how you apportion data. So I think it's how much do you trust in the relationships and the expertise that you've got in front of you. I think there's yes, we will learn and grow together as organizations and as functions, but we do have a little bit of a head start around much of it. And also, if you're going to try for transformation, do you have the backing? Have you done all the influencing through the organization to be able to get the transformation? Or is it that you need a use case to start with, then you go for the transformation? Yeah. That would be my tuppence worth.
Thank you, James. Dimple and Aidan, I'm going to come to you actually first, but I also want to just tell the audience that a feedback survey has just been sent round. So It will be in your email inboxes. So please do, if you get a moment, fill that in, because it means that we can give you exactly the type of webinars and events and the topics that you're interested in going forward. So very grateful in advance if you could fill that in for us. Dimple and Aidan, what James was saying there about kind of common mistakes from the past, do you kind of see that in your own project? Is that something that kind of you recognize?
Yes.
from your...
Yes, very much so.
Aidan, you first, then Dimple.
Okay. Yeah, we went with the, well, we said to Blue Prism, it's kind of one process. All you want to do is get this data set and move it into here. But then when we looked into it, it was kind of multiple application forms. So therefore we had to kind of tease out the different ways of grabbing the data from the different application forms. The dashboard, the ability to kind of feed stuff back, it sounds good and it sounds easy to do, but in actual fact it ended up, as Dimple said, taking us as long, if not a little bit longer, to actually put the data in manually into the dashboard and then get the robot to pick it up and then put it into a data set. So that it was a useful exercise, but there were quite a few times where we kind of shot down kind of dead ends and then had to kind of come back out again to kind of simplify our process and make sure that the robots were genuinely enhancing our process rather than just adding a new process. So
that importance of kind of ongoing communication and the ability to flex and adapt, really important, it sounds like. Dimple, I can't believe our time is going really quickly, so I'm going to come to Dimple and then I'm going to come to Phil for some final remarks. So Dimple, over to you.
I think Aidan's pretty much covered it all. So yeah.
Thanks, Dimple. So Phil, your thoughts on anything so far, but also just your reflections on the whole conversation and anything that's kind of really stuck out for you, advice to civil servants who are in the audience, you know, when they might be thinking about this.
Good question. So I think first off, again, Siobhan, thank you very much for hosting, sterling effort. Dimple and Aidan, thank you very much for doing that. And James, again, as always, thank you very much. I think my observation is generally probably what we see regularly, and I speak with the market about on a regular basis, is if you're thinking about doing this, you know, don't be worried that you're going first or you're going alone. The MHRA, a great example. We're very fortunate as we have a very, very strong engagement with probably just over a third of NHS trusts up and down the country. We deal with probably more than 50 local authorities, a smattering of police forces. So there's a whole bunch of stuff, you know, we've learnt lessons as well along the way, how to engage early on, how not to engage, being very self-cognizant, I suppose, for one. So don't worry, you're not going first, you're not going alone. There's a ton of experience on both the public sector side and ours about wanting to dip your toe in the water. I suppose there's probably just a couple of really key points for me. One is try not to, and this might sound a bit sort of bizarre coming from a technology business, try not to focus on the tech. I'd say focus on how the organization, how your department or your agency is trying to execute work. What are the outcomes you're trying to deliver and how are you trying to go about doing that? The technology is amazing, but don't make that the starting point. Focus on the outcome and the service you're trying to deliver. I'd say it's been touched on by, I think, everybody here this afternoon, is try and embed it culturally and land it culturally correctly to start off with. The projects that we've seen, if you look at both ends of the spectrum, I shan't use the word failed, not as successful projects versus those that have absolutely soared like eagles. The ones that have worked so well are the ones where it's been fully embraced by the senior leadership of the organization, the chief exec, the DG, whoever it might be, CFO, COO, and it's been landed correctly. And we've touched on this thing about it augmenting rather than replacing humans, but the organization embracing it culturally. So place people at the heart of your automation agenda. And that sounds a bit like a sort of a sleazy catchphrase, but it's actually really true. Place people at the heart of what you're trying to do, your staff and also your citizens and your customers. I think Dimple and Aidan said it, start small, think big, then scale is what I say. Don't try and eat the elephant whole, as the expression goes. And then the biggest thing, and this is part of the reason why I personally have a deep passion about engaging with the public sector, is the public sector, in the purest sense of it that one knows from the corporate enterprise world, you're not in competition with each other. Yes, certain departments might, there might be a bit of friendly rivalry, or between councils, there might be, a bit of rivalry, but largely you have the ability to collaborate and deploy a collegiate mindset that doesn't exist in the corporate world. And I think Dimple touched on it, and we've seen this across the NHS and across councils, and we're seeing it across police forces. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. People like Dimple and Aidan will probably be more than happy if you bought them a coffee and a pastry to say, look, this is what we've learned and this is what we've done. And actually the whole raison d'etre behind it is sharing actually some of the processes and the objects that have been built. So we have examples with NHS trusts, for example, where they are openly sharing automations behind the scenes. And we're totally okay with that, because that's the altruistic aspect. It drives greater use of the digital worker, and that's going to drive a better output for the citizen and for the taxpayer. So share, collaborate, be collegiate would be my biggest thing for the UK civil service. Say, please just talk to each other more and collaborate, because that will deliver better outcomes. But yeah, it kind of leaves me, I suppose, the only last thing I'd say is, if anybody either has been listening to this and the other has no idea where to start, or people are a bit further down the line and thought, oh, look, we'd like to explore it, there is no obligation and there's absolutely no cost from our side. We will support in what's probably traditionally called the pre-sales phase, pre-contract, on a completely complimentary basis. Reach out to me, to one of the team. We will come and support you in a collaborative workshop, which will generate a straw man of a business case that goes, right, if we were to automate some stuff, this is what it might look like. And then you can play with that yourselves. So if you'd like to, we're more than happy to help. We're more than happy to actually put you in touch with other public sector clients. You can speak directly to those guys and girls and ask them rather than us, but we're here to help.
Thank you, Phil, so much. And I know genuinely that throughout the pandemic in particular, you have given a lot of your services at no cost to the public sector. So that is hugely appreciated as well. I'm afraid we are out of time. I just want to say, I loved what you said there, Phil, in your closing remarks about the importance of collaboration, always a big issue, I think, for the civil service. We need to get better at talking across our boundaries and working with each other, aligning automation with the culture of an organization if you really want it to fly. And then what I've loved about the whole discussion today is, although this was about technology, and I think some people can think of automation as quite dry, it's been more than anything about people and putting people at the center of everything, which has been really great to hear on the discussion. A huge thank you from me to Dimple and Aidan for giving up their time and sharing their ideas. Exactly what Phil was saying. We want more of that sharing of ideas and experience. Thank you so much to Phil and James from Blue Prism for sharing their expertise with us today. There will be a link to the video of this webinar that will be sent around to everybody who was registered today. So if you missed any of it or you want to share it with your colleagues, you will be able to do that. And there will also be a write-up of the key points that came up in the discussion today, which will come out in a couple of weeks on the website, and we'll send a link around to everybody for that as well. But from me, it's just a final thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the day wherever you are. Enjoy the evening, and hope to see you again soon at another webinar. Thanks, everybody. Have a good evening. Goodbye.